If you're about to witness what happens when the government decides a human being is too dangerous to exist in normal society, then smash that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment below what prison terrifies you the most, because what you're about to see will haunt you long after this video ends. The concrete walls are 7 feet thick. The windows, when they exist at all, are 4 inches wide. The cells are 12 feet by 7 feet, roughly the size of a king-sized bed. Inside ADX Florence, located in the barren high desert of Colorado, 368 men live in conditions that the United Nations has called psychological torture. This is not a prison designed for rehabilitation. This is a tomb for the living, a place where America sends the criminals it never wants the world to see again. Tommy Silverstein knew he was coming here long before the transport van crossed the Rocky Mountains. In 1983, he had killed a prison guard at Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. It wasn't his first killing, and everyone knew it wouldn't be his last if given the chance. For years, he had been shuffled through the federal system, leaving blood and chaos wherever corrections officers tried to contain him. But ADX Florence was different. When it opened in 1994, it was built with one purpose: to break men like Tommy Silverstein without ever laying a hand on them. The day he arrived, shackled at the wrists, waist, and ankles, Tommy looked up at the desert fortress rising from the pale dirt like a scar on the earth. No razor wire topped the walls because no one had ever escaped, and no one ever would. The design itself was a masterpiece of isolation. Each prisoner would spend 23 hours a day alone in their cell. The remaining hour would be spent alone in a slightly larger cage. Human contact would be minimal, almost non-existent. Conversations would be forbidden. Even the guards rarely spoke. Tommy was led through a series of reinforced steel doors, each one slamming shut with a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel. The air inside was cold, sterile, suffocating. He was photographed, stripped, searched, and given a jumpsuit that felt like wearing shame. Then he was taken to his cell in the special housing unit, a place reserved for the absolute worst of the worst. The cell was smaller than he had imagined. A concrete bed. A stainless steel sink and toilet combination bolted to the floor. A single fluorescent light that never turned off. The window, a thin slit, faced another concrete wall. No sky. No horizon. Just grey. Tommy sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the door. There was no handle on the inside. No clock. No mirror. Time, in this place, did not exist. The first weeks were disorienting. Meals came through a slot in the door. A voice over an intercom told him when to move, when to stop, when to breathe. Showers were solitary, taken in a stall barely wide enough to turn around. Recreation was an hour in a cage with concrete walls and a metal grate overhead. The only glimpse of sky a fractured grid of light. Tommy tried to count the days, scratching marks into the wall with his fingernail, but he quickly lost track. The sameness swallowed everything. Other prisoners were near, he knew that much. He could hear them sometimes, muffled screams in the distance, the scrape of metal on metal, the low hum of madness seeping through the walls. But he never saw them. The prison was designed so that inmates could go years without ever seeing another human face besides the occasional guard in full riot gear. Even during medical visits, prisoners were restrained, their movements monitored by cameras that watched from every angle. Tommy was not alone in his suffering. Down the corridor, in a cell identical to his, was Ramzi Youssef, the man who had bombed the World Trade Center in 1993. A few doors over was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose 18-year reign of terror had killed 3 and injured 23. There were cartel leaders, terrorist masterminds, mob enforcers, and serial killers. Men whose names had made headlines, whose crimes had shattered lives. And now they were ghosts, locked away in a place the world had forgotten. But ADX Florence was not just about punishment. It was about control. The prison operated on a level system. Prisoners who behaved could earn small privileges: a radio, a 13-inch black and white television, an extra hour of recreation. Those who acted out faced even harsher isolation. Meals could be withheld. Showers denied. The light in the cell could be dimmed to near darkness or brightened to an unbearable glare. Everything was designed to strip away identity, to reduce a man to nothing more than a number in a cell. Tommy tried to resist. He shouted at the guards, banged on the walls, refused to comply with orders. But resistance in ADX was futile. The guards did not react. They did not engage. They simply waited. And eventually, the silence won. Tommy stopped shouting. He stopped banging. He sat on his concrete bed and stared at the wall, feeling his mind begin to unravel thread by thread. Months turned into years. His hair grew long and tangled. His body weakened. He began talking to himself, answering questions no one had asked. The line between reality and delusion blurred. He saw faces in the concrete, heard voices in the hum of the ventilation system. Time collapsed into a single endless moment. Then, one morning, something changed. A guard appeared at his door, not with a meal tray, but with a folded piece of paper. Tommy stared at it, his hands trembling. The guard said nothing, just slid it through the slot and walked away. Tommy unfolded the paper slowly, his heart pounding. It was a letter. From the outside. From someone he thought had forgotten him. But when he read the first line, his blood turned to ice. The letter was from his daughter, a girl he had not seen since she was 7 years old. She was 29 now, a woman he wouldn't recognize if she stood in front of him. Her name was Claire, and the handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if every word had been weighed before being committed to paper. Tommy read the first paragraph 3 times before his brain could process what she was telling him. She had found him. After years of searching through court records, prison transfers, and bureaucratic dead ends, she had tracked him to ADX Florence. But that wasn't what made his hands shake. Claire wasn't writing to reconnect. She was writing because she needed answers. 3 months ago, her mother, Tommy's ex-wife Angela, had been found dead in her apartment in Denver. The police had ruled it a suicide. Claire didn't believe them. Tommy's vision blurred as he read on. Angela had been found in her bathroom, wrists slashed, a half-empty bottle of pills on the counter. But Claire described inconsistencies that the investigators had dismissed. The apartment door had been unlocked, unusual for a woman who lived alone and always kept it bolted. Angela's phone was missing, never recovered. And there were bruises on her arms, faint but visible in the autopsy photos Claire had fought to obtain, bruises that suggested a struggle. The police had closed the case within 2 weeks. Suicide. Depression. A woman who had lived a hard life finally giving up. But Claire had kept digging. She had spoken to neighbors who heard raised voices the night before Angela's body was discovered. She had found a receipt in her mother's coat pocket from a coffee shop across town, dated the morning of her death, a place Angela rarely went. And most disturbing of all, Claire had received a phone call from an unknown number just days after the funeral. A man's voice, barely a whisper, had said 6 words before the line went dead. "Your mother knew too much." Tommy sat motionless in his cell, the letter trembling in his hands. Angela had visited him once, years ago, before ADX Florence existed, back when he was still at Marion. She had come to tell him she was done, that she was taking Claire and disappearing, that he would never see them again. He had screamed at her through the reinforced glass, threatened her, called her every name he could think of. She had stared at him with dead eyes and walked away. That was the last time they had spoken. But Angela knowing too much. That didn't make sense. She had nothing to do with his crimes. She had left him long before the murders that landed him in Supermax. She was a waitress, a single mother trying to survive. What could she possibly have known that would get her killed? Tommy read the letter again, searching for clues. Claire had included a single photograph, old and creased, showing Angela standing outside a bar called the Tailspin in East Denver. Tommy recognized it immediately. That was where he used to meet with Danny Cortez, a mid-level enforcer for a drug crew that operated out of Colorado in the early 90s. Danny had connections, dirty cops, judges on payroll, people who made problems disappear. Tommy had done work for them before his arrest. Jobs that were never discussed, never documented, never solved. And Angela had known about it. She had begged him to stop, warned him that he was going to get killed or locked up forever. He had ignored her. But what if she had seen something? What if she had been there, at the wrong place at the wrong time, and witnessed something that powerful people wanted buried? Tommy stood and walked to the narrow window in his cell. Beyond the slit of thick glass, he could see nothing but the concrete wall of another building. No sky. No freedom. Just the same suffocating grey that had become his entire world. He thought about Claire, a daughter he had abandoned, now trying to solve a murder the police refused to investigate. She was in danger. He knew it with the same certainty he knew he would die in this cell. He needed to get a message to her. But communication from ADX Florence was tightly controlled. Letters were screened, phone calls monitored, visits almost non-existent. Even if he could reach her, what could he tell her? He had no evidence, no proof, only a gut feeling that Angela's death was connected to his past. Days passed. Tommy couldn't sleep. He paced his cell, 12 feet by 7 feet, back and forth, until his legs ached and his mind screamed for release. He tried to remember details from those years, names, faces, jobs he had done for Cortez's crew. There had been a warehouse job, a shipment that went missing, 2 men who ended up in the South Platte River with bullets in their heads. There had been a cop, a detective named Raymond Hale, who had been asking too many questions until he suddenly stopped. Tommy had never asked what happened to Hale. He had learned not to ask questions. Then, one evening, the intercom in his cell crackled to life. A voice, cold and mechanical, instructed him to prepare for a visitor. Tommy froze. Visitors at ADX Florence were rare, especially for someone like him. He had no family left, no friends, no lawyer who cared. His heart pounded as he was shackled and led through the maze of corridors to a small room divided by thick glass. Sitting on the other side, staring at him with eyes that burned with determination, was Claire. She looked like Angela, the same sharp cheekbones, the same dark hair pulled back tight. But her expression was harder, colder, forged by years of pain and abandonment. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass. Tommy hesitated, then did the same. "I didn't think they'd let you in," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "They almost didn't," Claire replied. "I had to lie. Told them I was writing a book about prisoners and rehabilitation. They don't care as long as the paperwork is clean." Tommy nodded slowly. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be digging into this." "She was my mother. And she's dead because of me," Tommy said, the words tasting like ash. "Whatever she knew, whatever got her killed, it traces back to the life I lived. You need to stop before you end up the same way." Claire leaned closer to the glass, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I found something. The coffee shop receipt. I went there. Talked to the staff. One of the baristas remembered Mom. Said she met with a man that morning. Older, grey hair, expensive suit. They talked for maybe 20 minutes. Then he left. She stayed behind, shaking, crying. The barista asked if she was okay. Mom said she was fine and walked out." Tommy's blood ran cold. Did the barista describe him? Anything specific? Just that he was calm. Too calm. Like he was used to delivering bad news. Tommy closed his eyes. He knew who it was. Raymond Hale. The detective who had disappeared from the case all those years ago. The man who had stopped asking questions because someone had paid him to stop. Hale wasn't dead. He was still out there, still cleaning up loose ends. "Claire," Tommy said, his voice urgent. "You need to leave Denver. Tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't use your credit cards. Don't." The line went dead. The lights in the visiting room flickered once, then went out completely. Tommy heard Claire scream on the other side of the glass, but he couldn't see her. Guards rushed in, shouting orders, but their voices were drowned out by the sudden wail of the prison alarm. When the lights came back on 30 seconds later, Claire was gone. Tommy was dragged back to his cell, his shouts echoing through the corridors like the cries of a dying animal. The guards said nothing, their faces blank, their grips iron-tight on his arms. He screamed Claire's name until his voice shattered, until blood vessels burst in his eyes, until they threw him onto the concrete floor of his cell and slammed the door shut. The lock engaged with a sound like a gunshot. Then silence. He lay there for hours, maybe days. Time had lost all meaning. The fluorescent light above him hummed its endless electric song. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Claire taken. Claire hurt. Claire dead in a ditch somewhere because he had been too slow, too stupid, too trapped to protect her. The daughter he had abandoned was now paying for his sins, and he could do nothing but rot in this tomb of concrete and steel. But Tommy Silverstein had not survived 4 decades in the prison system by giving up. He had killed to stay alive. He had fought guards, inmates, entire prison gangs. He had become a legend in the federal system, a man so dangerous they built ADX Florence just to contain him. And now, for the first time in years, he had something to fight for. He sat up slowly, his body aching, and stared at the door. There was no escape from ADX Florence. The prison had been designed by experts who studied every prison break in history and engineered solutions to prevent them. Motion sensors, pressure plates, cameras in every corner, guards trained in counter-terrorism tactics, walls thick enough to withstand explosives. Tommy had heard the stories, the whispers among inmates about men who had tried and failed. One had managed to dig through his cell wall only to find another wall behind it. Another had tried to overpower a guard during recreation and been shot with rubber bullets before he took 3 steps. But Tommy wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about information. ADX Florence was a black hole, but even black holes had cracks. Guards talked. Mail came in. And somewhere in this prison was someone who knew what had happened to Claire. He waited until the next meal delivery. When the slot in his door opened and a tray slid through, Tommy was ready. He grabbed the edge of the slot before it could close and wedged his fingers in the gap. Pain shot through his hand as the guard on the other side tried to pull it shut, but Tommy held on. "I need to talk to the warden," Tommy said, his voice low and steady. "Tell him Tommy Silverstein has information about Raymond Hale. Tell him I know where the bodies are buried." The guard paused. Tommy could hear breathing on the other side of the door, heavy and uncertain. Then the pressure on his fingers eased. "You've got 30 seconds before I break your hand," the guard said. Raymond Hale. Former Denver detective. On the payroll of the Cortez crew in the 90s. Killed at least 4 people that I know of, maybe more. He's still active. Still cleaning up loose ends. My daughter came here to ask me about him, and now she's missing. I want to know where she is, and I want protective custody for her. In exchange, I'll tell you everything. The slot slammed shut, smashing Tommy's fingers. He pulled his hand back with a grunt, blood dripping from his knuckles. But he had delivered the message. Now he could only wait. 2 hours later, the door to his cell opened. Not a guard, but 3 men in suits, federal agents with badges clipped to their belts and expressions that said they had seen it all. The lead agent was tall, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice. He introduced himself as Special Agent Marcus Dwyer, FBI. "You mentioned Raymond Hale," Dwyer said, standing just outside the cell. "Start talking." Tommy told them everything. The warehouse job. The 2 bodies in the river. The shipments that disappeared and reappeared in evidence lockers with half the product missing. The dirty cops. The judges. And Raymond Hale, the man who had investigated Danny Cortez for 6 months before suddenly dropping the case and retiring early with a pension that was far too generous for his years of service. "Hale didn't disappear," Tommy said. "He got paid. And he's been cleaning up anyone who knew about it ever since. My ex-wife Angela must have seen something back then, something she kept quiet about for years. But someone found out she knew. Someone sent Hale to silence her. And now my daughter is asking questions." Dwyer listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Tommy finished, the agent nodded slowly. "We've had Hale on our radar for 2 years, Dwyer said. Low-level corruption investigation. But we never had enough to move on him. If what you're saying is true, this changes things." "Where's Claire?" Tommy demanded. "Where's my daughter?" Dwyer exchanged a glance with the other agents. Then he pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Tommy. On the screen was surveillance footage from the prison visiting room, time-stamped from the blackout. Tommy watched as the lights went out. He watched as 2 men in guard uniforms entered the room, grabbed Claire, and carried her out through a side door that should have been locked. "Those aren't our guards," Dwyer said. "We've identified one of them. Former corrections officer. Fired 3 years ago for excessive force. Now working private security. Guess who hired him? Hale, Tommy whispered. Dwyer nodded. We tracked them to a building in Commerce City, Industrial District. By the time we got there, it was empty. But we found blood. Not much, but enough to run DNA. It's your daughter's. Tommy's world tilted. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint. He felt his sanity, already frayed by years of isolation, begin to unravel completely. But then Dwyer said something that pulled him back from the edge. She's alive. We picked up a signal from her phone 40 minutes ago. Hale must have missed it when he searched her. She's smart, your daughter. Left it on, low battery, transmitting just enough for us to track. She's being held in a storage facility off I-76. We're moving in tonight. Tommy looked up at the agent, his eyes burning with a desperate hope he hadn't felt in decades. Let me out. Give me a weapon. Let me finish this. Dwyer almost smiled. You know I can't do that. But I can promise you this, if we get her out alive, if we bring down Hale and everyone connected to him, we'll make sure she knows you helped. That you gave her a chance. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all Tommy had. The agents left. The door closed. Tommy sat on his concrete bed and waited, staring at the walls that had been his entire world for so long. Hours passed. Then, just after midnight, the intercom crackled to life. Silverstein. You've got a call. Tommy was led to a phone room, a space he had only seen twice in his years at ADX Florence. He picked up the receiver, his hand shaking. Dad. Claire's voice, weak but alive, broke something inside him. Tears he hadn't cried in 40 years streamed down his face. You're okay, he said, his voice cracking. You're okay. They got me out, Claire said. The FBI raided the place. Hale tried to run. They shot him. He's dead, Dad. It's over. Tommy closed his eyes, relief and grief washing over him in equal measure. I'm sorry, Claire. For everything. For your mother. For not being there. I know, she said quietly. I read Mom's journals after she died. She wrote about you. About the man you were before everything went wrong. She never stopped loving that man. And neither did I. The line went silent for a moment. Then Claire spoke again, her voice steady and clear. I'm going to visit you. Every month. For as long as it takes. You're still my father. And I'm not going to disappear. The call ended. Tommy stood there, holding the dead receiver, feeling something he thought had been destroyed years ago. Hope. Not for freedom. Not for redemption. But for connection. For a reason to survive one more day in this concrete hell. He was led back to his cell. The door closed. The lock engaged. The light hummed above him. But this time, when Tommy Silverstein lay down on his concrete bed, he didn't see walls. He saw his daughter's face. And for the first time in 20 years, he slept without nightmares. If this story showed you the true cost of violence, the way prisons destroy not just inmates but everyone connected to them, then don't let it end here. Subscribe, because the next story goes even deeper into the darkness. And trust me, you won't see the ending coming.